The following is an article from the Reformed Presbyterian published in September of 1838 entitled Intemperance. The indulgence of the lusts of the flesh has in all ages embraced a long, black, and most foul catalogue of sins. It was for the paltry gratification of the lust of the eye and of the taste that Adam and Eve violated the covenant of works. Quote, "And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof, and did eat, and gave also to her husband with her, and he did eat." Unquote. As these appetites, which men sinfully indulge, reside in the body, quote, "flesh and the lusts of the flesh," unquote, are often in the Scriptures used to designate the whole carnal and corrupt principle derived from Adam by original sin. It is chiefly for the indulgence of these fleshly appetites that men barter all prospects of eternal felicity offered to them in the everlasting gospel. It seems strange that rational beings, endowed with thought and reflection, and a regard for their own happiness, should reject with so much seeming deliberation all that is truly desirable and intrinsically excellent, and all that can render blessed such a being as man, for the transient enjoyment of what is base and contemptible. In none of these polluted gratifications do the deceitfulness of sin and the madness of the sinner display themselves more strikingly than in the unnatural and debased appetite for intoxicating drinks. Few have wrought such extensive mischief and deplorable evils. These maddening potions are entirely the work of man, and not one of them the work of the Creator. For there is no natural fluid, no fruit in the whole vegetable kingdom, no element in nature, when not tortured by art into unnatural forms, that will produce intoxication. Can anything be more preposterous than putting to the rack delicious fruits and nutritious grain, that they may be forced to yield active and poisonous stimulants for the destruction of the bodies and souls of men? Yet all this is done on a scale of prodigious magnitude, in the distilleries and breweries, and sometimes by men professing the Christian religion. The appetite for these intoxicating draughts is not natural, like that for our daily bread and for the pure water of the cool fountain. It is of artificial production. But, as forced and unnatural appetites usually are, it is violent, insatiable, quote, "like the horse-leech's two daughters crying, 'Give, give,' unquote. Like the grave, it never says enough." It is truly amazing that it grew up to such a height, without much observation, in Christian nations, absorbed for its gratification so vast an amount of capital, destroyed so vast treasures of the fruits of the ground, enfeebled the health of millions, brought down to a premature grave hundreds of thousands, demoralizing whole communities, and spread mourning, lamentation, and woe over so many lands. Even the Church of Christ suffered grievously under the scourge. Many of her sons and even priests at the altar were seized as its victims and hurried down to perdition. Yet all these deeds it perpetrated, all these desolations it wrought for a succession of so many generations, while no one seems to have suspected that there was any evil in the agent employed in all this work of physical destruction and moral desolation. Moralists, statesmen, physicians, and Christians promoted distillation, brewery, and trafficking. All drunk, and all less or more suffered. It is wonderful how all this could happen, and yet the agent be held innocent and even essential to the well-being of society. It would seem that had anything else produced the same visible amount of consumption, suffering, and moral evil, the whole civilized world would have been roused, concentrated its powers, and exerted all its energies for its extermination. But in truth, the nations had drunk of the intoxicating bowl and were slumbering on the brink of ruin under the influence of the soporific draught. This is no picture of fancy, but the sober and dreadful reality. The evil at length seems to have become so appalling, and to have advanced with strides so gigantic as to demand attention, awake men to a sense of the danger, and enforce the necessity of adopting some effectual means of arresting its baleful progress. This is believed to be the true origin of that mighty movement in the public mind which, for the last 8 or 10 years, has been advancing, and accumulating an energy rarely witnessed in relation to any other branch of public morals. The monster at first regarded with disdain and scorn all attempts to call in question the legitimacy of his empire or to abridge his power. But he now is held at bay and begins to quail at the array marshaled for his destruction. It is painful to reflect that among the professors of religion, in not a few instances, this cruel monster looks for and obtains aid in the desperate struggles to prolong his existence and his ravages. Surely did such professors know the extent of the evils which intemperance has wrought, and still works in all that is dear to the Christian and the patriot, in the countenance which directly and indirectly it receives from them, they would change their doings in this matter. They have not, we are persuaded, deeply considered what tremendous sentences of reprobation against this evil God has recorded in his holy word. Here are a few of them. Quote, "And Noah began to be an husbandman, and he planted a vineyard, and he drank of the wine, and was drunken, and he was uncovered in his tent." Unquote. Here this sin of even a saint is recorded, in terms designed to excite our loathing and abhorrence, a sin that filled his good sons Shem and Japheth with shame. They went backward and covered their father's nakedness, and their faces were backward, and they saw not the nakedness of their father. Genesis 9, verses 20 and 23. Quote, "And there went out fire from the Lord, and devoured them, and they died before the Lord. And the Lord spake unto Aaron, saying, Do not drink wine, nor strong drink, thou nor thy sons with thee, when ye go into the tabernacle of the congregation, lest ye die." Unquote. Leviticus 10, verses 2 and 7. Nadab and Abihu were thus devoured by the fire of God's wrath issuing from the altar for a sin into which they were led by drunkenness. As the context shows, and as it is expounded by all judicious commentators, quote, "And his servant Zimri, captain of half his chariots, conspired against him, as he was in Tirzah, drinking himself drunk in the house of Arza, steward of his house in Tirzah. And Zimri went and smote him and killed him." Unquote. 1 Kings 16, verse 9. Ella's drunkenness made him so base and tyrannical that even his most confident friends could not longer bear his cruelty and debasement. Quote, "Ben-Hadad was drinking himself drunk," unquote, 1 Kings 20, verse 16, when the armies of Israel marched against him, and his mighty hosts were beaten with prodigious slaughter by a few men, quote, "like two little flocks of kids," unquote. Belshazzar and his wives, concubines, and 1,000 lords were all slain in the midst of a drunken revel, and the great city of Babylon sacked when sunk in the most shameful inebriation. The last and crowning sin of that debased metropolis of the world was drunkenness, and as this had fostered all other crimes, so God employed it to desolate the city and bring to an end the Babylonian Empire. Quote, "Woe to the crown of pride, to the drunkards of Ephraim," unquote. Quote, "The priest and the prophet have erred through strong drink, they are swallowed up of wine," unquote. Isaiah 28, verses 1 and 7. So it appears that this sin was most conspicuous in bringing the 10 tribes, here called Ephraim, to destruction, as it was in destroying Babylon. Whereas drunkenness mentioned in the Holy Scriptures, without some distinguished mark of the divine wrath. Quote, "Who hath woe, who hath sorrow, who hath contentions, who hath babbling, who hath wounds without cause, who hath redness of eyes? They that tarry long at the wine, and they that go to seek mixed wine. Look not thou upon the wine when it is red, when it giveth its colour in the cup, when it moveth itself aright. At last it biteth like a serpent, and stingeth like an adder." Unquote. Proverbs 23, verses 29 and 31. What a catalogue of evils! How dreadful a delineation of the insidious nature of all intoxicating drinks! Will some advocate of the habitual use of wine, some learned or wise friend of tippling at wine and beer, expound for us the prohibition, quote, "Look not upon the wine when it is red," unquote, quote, "Drunkards shall not inherit the kingdom of God," unquote, 1 Corinthians 6, verse 10. We find intemperance here classed with the most base and aggravated sins: fornication, idolatry, adultery, the crime against nature, theft, covetousness, slander, and extortion. The mother of harlots and abominations is said to be, quote, "drunken with the blood of the saints," unquote. These are but a few of the many places in the Scriptures where this sin is exhibited in its odiousness and bitter fruits.